Okay, so we'll start now. Before I start, I really want to thank the Britain Museum of American Art for letting me do this presentation, and I feel like this has been my second home for the past couple of months. So the title of this presentation is Thomas Cole's The Clove Catskills, The Poetry of Nature, and the Price of Progress. Thomas Cole is easily one of the most important American painters of the 19th century. He's considered a founder of the Hudson River School and creative godfather to generations of American landscape artists. Cole's professional career spanned from the mid-1820s to the mid-1840s, when he died prematurely at the age of 47.
Excuse me, could you speak up?
Yeah. I'm sorry about that. So one of the highlights of this museum and of Cole's career is a very early work titled The Clove Catskills, dated 1826. Especially compared to the rest of the pieces in the Martin Gallery, The Clove Catskills is a chaotic jumble of trees, dead trees, rocks, clouds, and wind. It is a cavernous landscape with steep hills and autumn foliage. Regarding the four seasons, Cole once wrote, quote, "There is one season when the American forest surpasses all the world in gorgeousness. That is the autumnal." And I think it's very poetic that Cole is including changing colors, because in many ways this piece, as well as Cole's artistic body of work in general, has much to do with change of light to dark, of living material to dead material, of storms changing into clear sunshine, change in the way land has been used over time, and lastly, change in the societies in which Cole's landscapes belong to, particularly the United States, where Cole spent most of his life. In addition to just how chaotic and in a state of flux the composition is, another thing that makes this piece stand out in the gallery is how dark the painting is. There are very dark color values, some spots almost pitch black, while other spots seem to be bathing in light. And you can also see that the irregular cloud formations projected onto the hillsides, forming very weird shadows. And one can imagine light coming down from above and coming diagonally to the bottom left of the canvas, but it still seems a bit improbable the way things are lit. This combination of light and dark makes the landscape seem much more imposing and dramatic than it might otherwise be. Another interesting thing is that this composition is almost completely foreground and middle ground. The foreground consists of a thick band of dead things, rocks, dead trees, all non-living material. And this band takes up a considerable part of the canvas. The middle ground consists of the steep hillsides, which create a tunnel of autumn foliage, which leads the eye to a small stretch of background. And in this background, there's a very small stretch of a sunny vista, which takes up very little space on the canvas. But again, our eye is led to it through this tunnel of autumn foliage. Also note that Cole is depicting trees at all stages of life and at all colors. And the dead trees in particular are conspicuously placed. You see one pine placed in the foreground, another sticking up out of one of the hillsides. So one of the last features that I want to point out to you is actually a bit hard to see. And that is, in the foreground, you can see a human figure. This is a Native American, though not quite a Native American really. This is a Native American caricature, an idealized figure that is supposed to represent the idea of a quote-unquote noble savage. It's not an accurate depiction of the indigenous Mohicans who occupied the land around the Catskills before removal by white settlers. if you didn't notice the human figure until now, you shouldn't feel too bad, because as it turns out, this museum didn't know that the human figure was there until the 1960s. That's the 1960s, not the 1860s. It wasn't until there was a cleaning of the painting in 1964 that they realized it, and the director promptly wrote to the previous owners of the piece, Vos Galleries in Boston, and he writes, "Oddly enough, there's a slight suggestion of an Indian standing in the middle of the painting, which I can't remember ever there being before. If it was, then the painting has been overcleaned. If not, it was so damn dirty that the cleaning has brought the outline of the Indian into view." The CEO of Vos responded, "Enclosed is the only print we have of your Thomas Cole. I don't remember the Indian of whom we speak, and cannot make him out in the photograph." He couldn't figure it out either. "Are you sure you haven't changed your brand of refreshment?" This is how directors talk to each other. Anyways, the Native American figure is very important and in intentional inclusion in the piece. For a number of reasons, the Native American caricature adds to the grandeur of the scene. The figure appears to be dwarfed by the landscape. His smallness makes the viewer feel small. The figure is obscured enough to not have any identifiable personal features, but he's clear enough to be recognizable as a fellow human being whose body language, for example, we can read. And we therefore identify with the figure. And for Cole, again, the figure is not a real person, not a real Native American, but rather a stand-in for the idea of a once present but now gone primitive people living amongst the wilderness. This shows that Cole is very conscious of the processes of time. He's not painting the Catskills of 1826 as it actually appeared. Rather, he's winding the clock back to an idealized past. The Catskills by 1826 had, in fact, already gone through a process of dislocation of indigenous Mohicans off their lands. And far from being the unsullied wilderness that Cole is portraying here, the Catskills had developed by this time a sizable tourist industry with hotels and eating establishments. But Cole was adamant about not painting the present. This consciousness of time, and more specifically of temporal cycles and change over time, is at the heart of this painting. Cole is contemplating the cycles of the four seasons. He's painting things at once present, now gone, once living, now dead, at one moment stormy, another moment sunny. And as we'll see, I think this is ultimately about Cole's personal anxieties about the United States and the changes it was enduring through the so-called age of democratic revolutions and the early rise of industrial capitalism. Cole was born and grew up in the heart of the Industrial Revolution in Lancashire, England. And by the time he moved to the US with his family in 1818, the country was still in the process of creating itself politically in the aftermath of the American Revolution. And it was also the time of, as I said, the early beginnings of industrial capitalism. So the United States in this period is in a state of flux. There's a lot of political, economic, and social changes taking place. Oh, and another such change is what historians call the transportation revolution, which is the invention of new forms of transportation like steamboats, railroad, which allowed for the expansion of settlement westward, but also in all directions. And it's actually a steamboat that Cole would have taken up the Hudson in 1825, where Cole visited the Catskills for the first time. In the Catskills, he made a collection of pencil sketches. And after returning to New York City, Cole hunkered down in his New York City apartment and his very cramped studio, and used these pencil sketches as guides to create landscapes in oil on canvas. And the Clove Catskills is one such example. It was created a year after that initial trip up the Hudson in 1825. This trip up the Hudson is considered by many to be the beginning of Cole's professional career. He was an engraver before, he was a sort of itinerant artisan artist, but this is really the beginnings of his professional career. And it's also considered the sort of origin story of the Hudson River School itself. So Cole began to make a name for himself as some of these paintings caught the attention of the early Republic's small clique of wealthy art enthusiasts, such as Daniel Wadsworth, founder of the Wadsworth Athenaeum, who befriended Cole and commissioned this piece, Catskills Cloves. This is another great example of one of Cole's early career works, another example of a composition that he made from the pencil sketches from the 1825 trip up the Hudson. Cole wasn't the first person in America to paint landscapes. In this respect, Thomas Birch of Philadelphia, John Trumbull, who painted some landscapes, and Alfred Fisher are predecessors to Cole. But it is important to note that there weren't that many painters in America. Basically, there wasn't as much of a tradition of painting in America as there was in Europe. If you were an artist, America wasn't really the place to be. In addition to America not being the best place to be geographically for a painter, landscape painting wasn't the best place to be on the hierarchy of visual art. At the top was history painting, just above royal portraiture, and landscape was more towards the bottom. And Cole's early letters, his correspondence, is filled with, I don't want to say complaints, but frustrations at how hard it is to be a painter in America. And not just a painter in America, but a landscape painter in America. And not just a landscape painter in America, but a landscape painter in America with very little formal training, as he was. And also a part of this frustration is that Cole was not simply painting views. He was working in what he called a higher style of landscape. Cole saw landscapes as no less intellectual than history painting. He wanted to paint ideas into the landscape. And as we've already seen, Cole was in his own way painting a sort of idealized past. I think this 1827 work titled Mountain Landscape is a perfect example of this. This is in the exhibit on the second floor. We can go see this. This is not really Cole painting an American landscape at all. This is Cole letting his imagination run wild with this biblical imagery. Similarly, I think Expulsion from Eden, which is at the MFA in Boston, is another great example. This is also biblical imagery, this time explicitly biblical imagery. Yet, when art historians talk about Cole's use of allegory and his use of symbolism, they more often than not go to his later works. They go to his works from the 1830s and the 1840s, not his earlier works from the 1820s, not his works that were the early oil on canvases derived from the initial trip up the Hudson in 1825. More than any other work, allegory is discussed in regard to Cole's 5-part series, The Course of Empire, in the 1830s. Indeed, this is Cole's most explicitly political work. This series of paintings traces the course of human civilization. Again, these are idealized images of the idea of human society, beginning with the savage state, going into the Arcadian or pastoral state, with a climax in the consummation of imperial splendor, to a dramatic destruction and finally a period of desolation when nature reconquers the land. Many art historians have discussed this painting. It's a very cited work. But what's important for us here is that Cole is presenting the idea that human civilization has its rise and fall. It has its cycles. It has its opposites of dark and light, and change into dark and light, of stormy into sunny, and vice versa. And again, this is from the 1830s. This is not one of Cole's early works. Another work that people bring up when they talk about Cole and allegory is Cole's 1836 work, The Oxbow. This was painted basically at the same time period as The Course of Empire. And in this piece, we can see on the one side, wilderness, untamed sublime. On the other side, we see a kind of pastoral utopia. We see everywhere the marks, on the right side, everywhere the marks of human settlement and civilization. Some art historians like to emphasize that this is an early articulation of the idea of godly ordained manifest destiny. But I think Cole is much more critical, much more pessimistic, and much more ambiguous. If you look, so this is the Connecticut River. It's not actually near North, it's not like what is today South Hadley, but anyways. The Connecticut River, at least one art historian has noted that the Connecticut River is making a question mark, as if to ask, which side will win? Which side will win out? The stormy wilderness or the sunny civilized settlements? It's ambiguous. Is the storm coming or going? Remember that Course of Empire demonstrates that nature has the power to reconquer. Is a blasted out tree that you see and dead material in the foreground foreshadowing a catastrophic downfall, a downfall that all human societies must inevitably endure according to Cole? Again, it's ambiguous. So one last example of a work that art historians go to talk about Cole's use of symbolism and allegory is, again, not a work from the 1820s, but a work from the 1840s, River and the Catskills. Cole painted many versions of this scene. There's another one upstairs that you can see. And at first glance, this is just a beautiful scene. But knowing Cole, you have to dig much deeper. This is, as I would say, picturesque, punctuated by progress. In the foreground, you can see a human figure. And it's a bit difficult to see, but in his hand, he's carrying an axe. This is a tree cutter, a tree chopper. Much like how human settlement on the right side of the oxbow clears the land and deletes the foliage out of the wilderness, in this we see that the trees are being chopped down, portending the future for the rest of the landscape. And it seems that large swaths of the scene have already been cleared out for human settlement. We can also see this. That's a train. This is possibly the oldest oil on canvas depicting a locomotive. This might be the oldest painting with a train on it. So many art historians, and I agree, do not think Cole is celebrating the train. Cole did not like the trains going through the Catskills. My interpretation of this piece is that Cole is showing an early stage of modern civilization before its climax and perhaps its eventual destruction. At the moment, it seems to be at peace, but the picturesque scene is already punctuated by symbols of the price of progress, which portends a stormy future. So Cole's works from the 1830s and the 1840s are indeed full of allegorical, very allegorical, full of symbolism, political and religious symbolism, and they reflect Cole's anxieties regarding the changes taking place in the society around him. But I would like to forward the idea that it's not just Cole's later works in the 1830s and 1840s that people should go to talk about allegory. I think Cole's early works, including the Clove Catskills, is just as allegorical, just as socially conscious, just as philosophical as his later output. As we've seen, Cole is using the physical as well as the visual features of his landscapes to express ideas. Cole is exploring the economic, social, and political themes through his placement of landscape features like storm clouds, sunlight, and various sorts of human figures, usually in the foreground of his canvases. But this same vocabulary, this exact same vocabulary, in fact, can be seen in the Clove Catskills. To illustrate what I mean, I want to zero in on just one aspect of Cole's composition, the bands of dead things in the foreground. Because it becomes a little bit easier to see the thematic continuity of Cole's work if we just focus on the compositional continuities throughout Cole's career. So, Clove Catskills, 1826, we talked about how we see this band of dead rocks and dead trees. This is Cole's debut, Lake with Dead Trees, 1825. The subject is dead things. And once again, we see in the foreground uprooted trees. These are dead things in the foreground. 2 years later, we see, this is at the Wadsworth Athenaeum, view on Lake Winnipesaukee, uprooted trees. It's a beautiful scene now, but it seems like maybe a storm had passed and uprooted these trees. On the left of the foreground and also on the right, more dead things, rocks, more dead trees. Another 1827 work, again, dead things in the foreground. You can start to see how formulaic Cole is with this sort of thing. And that same rocky column of rock is similar to the column of rock that is in the Clove Catskills. Fast forward a little bit, 1832, this you can see in the Martin Gallery as well. Cole is, by this time he had gone to Europe, and it's a bit hard to see because this is a sketch, but he's painting dead things in the foreground once again. And once again, the subject of the painting is dead things. In the foreground, this right here, that's a piece of a Roman column, and typically would sign his name in these columns. And those rocks in the foreground as well, again, dead things in the foreground. We already saw the oxbow, once again, dead things in the foreground, the smashed out tree and rocks. This is a work that you can see, there's a copy at the Lyman Allen Art Museum in New London, and you can see a bigger version in the Wadsworth Athenaeum. This is an Italian landscape, and again, there's dead things in the foreground. Instead of the dead trees and rocks, it's the ruins of a great civilization of antiquity. Then we already saw, we're from the Catskills, the tree chopper with the chopped trees in the foreground, dead things. Then the last example that I'm going to show you, because you can play this game of find the dead things in the foreground in Cole and think about what he's saying. But this 1844 work is a great example of a piece at the very end of Cole's career. But the composition of the foreground is very similar to what you'll see in the Clove Catskills. That rocky outcropping with a dead tree. Right, so hold on, let me take a quick look. So the Clove Catskills is, in my opinion, another great example of Cole's concept of the higher style of landscape. We've already seen how the painting is a contemplation of change over time, of life cycles, and the struggle between opposites, namely the struggle between light and dark, stormy and sunny, past and present, living and dead. And I think this painting shows a network of opposites interacting in a dialectical way, and this is open to interpretation as to what Cole is trying to say allegorically. So I'm going to be honest, there's many ways you can interpret this piece, but for me, the Clove Catskills is on the one hand celebrating the sublime beauty of America. In this respect, the Native American caricature can be considered a symbol of a kind of patriotism or pride in America. But he's also expressing an anxiety that the American landscape is in danger. The Native American figure seems to be calling out for help. He seems to be in danger. The cycles of contrasting opposites seem to suggest that all civilization on the North American continent, all civilizations is at risk of decline and fall. No civilization, not the idealized civilization of the Native American living in the wilderness, the idealized civilization of the past, nor the contemporary civilization of the early republic in which Cole was living in, is safe from the dangers of a stormy destruction. For me, it's a tension between a kind of pride in the wilderness, in the landscape, and a pessimism of the price of progress. Okay, I want to wind down the presentation with a couple of counter examples. So one piece you can see in the Poetry of Nature exhibit is this piece by Asher B. Durand. It's the same subject of the Clove Catskills. It's the same thing, but this looks completely different. This is much more meditative, and as it turns out, this is actually how the clove would have appeared. Again, remember, Cole is taking the trip up the Hudson in 1825 during the summer, and he would not have seen the dramatic autumn foliage like that. It would have actually been all green. And this piece is Durand painting nature true to life. He's not necessarily imparting allegory into the painting. He's not idealizing just how dramatic it is. Also, another interesting thing is Cole is throwing you in this rocky foreground. As the viewer, you feel almost in danger that you don't know where you've come from. In this, Durand is giving you a nice path, so you know where you are as a viewer, and you have a pleasant path to walk on. The second piece that I'd like to show winding down that serves as a kind of counterexample to the Clove Catskills is Frederick Edwin Church's Mount Katahdin, and this is at the Yale University Art Gallery. So remember, Cole is painting an idealized past. He's painting the Clove Catskills, which again by 1825, 26, had already, it was not untamed wilderness. There was human settlements, there was a tourist industry. But Mount Katahdin, when Church painted this, actually was basically in the wilderness. Mount Katahdin is a very remote place even to this day. But Church is actually imagining an idealized future. He's placing in the bottom right side of the canvas that bridge you can see in the waterfall. That's kind of a mill and a housing settlement, and you can see along the road there are carriages. Church is idealizing a future. He's thinking of an idealized future, celebrating a future in which settlers are living at peace, and there's no danger of, you see no dangers of the price of progress. Okay, so I want to conclude by just saying that Cole, in a sense, had to turn to an idealized past. Cole was tackling the problems of his time, the problems of a rapidly changing country, and great socioeconomic and political changes, but he's not offering any solutions. Cole found personal solace in religion, but he could not forward any solutions for what the future ought to be. And I think this is actually a broader truth about Romanticism in general. If you think about it, a lot of the Romantic artists, painters, thinkers, they're some of the first people to wage a critique of modern society, of things like capitalism. They're really the first people to criticize things like capitalism, modern democracy. But a lot of the solutions they're presenting are either very eclectic or no solution at all. And in my opinion, Cole is really not presenting much of a solution at all. Again, he's finding solace in religion, and he's painting religion in some of his works. But for the viewer of today, looking at Cole's works, we see that a lot of the anxieties he's painting into his landscapes are still with us today. But it's completely up to us to think about the future for ourselves. Thanks. Some acknowledgements.